Welcome to episode 39 of Inside Politics, for teens, by teens, where I explore the politics and issues impacting our generation. I'm your host, Christina Li, and today I've invited Elizabeth Ralph, Deputy Editor at Politico Magazine. Elizabeth, how are you doing today?
I'm great. It's a busy news day, so I'm happy to find some time to be here.
Yes, thank you so much. So let's jump right in. So can you describe your role and your day-to-day responsibilities as an editor at Politico?
Sure. So Politico is a big organization. There's one section of Politico is the magazine, and that's Politico's home for long form narrative journalism and really distinctive long form pieces, but also opinion and analysis. So anything that's more opinionated, that's kind of a take on an opinionated take on the day's news, that will run in the magazine. We're also where all of the outside writers publish at Politico. So Politico.com is really very much for the Politico reporters. And we will publish outside voices, experts, former officials in the pages of the magazine. Now, that's not to say we don't publish Politico reporters. We do, but we also publish a wider range. So my job at the magazine as deputy editor is to, obviously edit stories. That's like anyone at the magazine. So a large portion of our job is generating ideas, fielding pitches from writers, and then taking them through the magazine process and pushing the pieces out into the world. The other big part of my job is the management of kind of the daily magazine flow, making sure that the stories that we have on the budget, the story budget are ready to go, and communicating a lot with making sure that we have stories planned out, for the next few days, and also communicating a lot with the main site, saying, okay, here and the homepage editors, here are the magazine stories we have today. Is it conflicting with anything that the Congress team has in the works, for example? Can we get these featured on the homepage? So there's a little bit of that. The other part of my job is I write the Women Rule newsletter, which is a newsletter about women in politics. And I also do a biweekly video series called The Backstory, which kind of dives into kind of like stories behind the news in an interesting way, some history. So that's it. But I'm not sure if this is relevant for right now, but I just got off of a 3-month stint as a reporter covering the race for the COVID vaccine, which was totally new and very fun. So I'm back at the magazine as of this week.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I guess when you talk about Politico as being this very big organization with lots of different, branches, what do you say that the Politico magazine targets, like a different demographic, or fills a different sort of niche than the main site does?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I would say overall, Politico has a pretty niche mission, right? Politics and policy. We're not general interest, we don't have a metro section. So really we're there for people who follow politics and policy really closely. That's whether they're based in Washington, D.C., whether they're based in state capitals around the world, or state capitals around the country, or really around the world, sort of this like global leadership audience. Now, the magazine does appeal to that audience, but I think we also have a slightly broader, slightly more general audience, just because we can step outside of the bounds of traditional policy and political, like hard political journalism. We do a lot of history, for example. We did a story about the ABC journalist, the kind of unknown ABC journalist in the 1960s, Lisa Howard, who traveled to Cuba during the Cold War and became a secret back channel between Fidel Castro and the White House, and had an affair with Fidel Castro. That kind of story, like that has a very, that can travel very widely. It's, hopefully going to be made into a feature film. So the magazine has a little bit more, breadth, I think, in that sense. We did a story about, Bitcoin miners in Seattle, in Washington State. So and with that comes, Politico has DC-based reporters. They also have reporters in state capitals around the world. Well, I should say around the country. There's also Politico Europe, which is around the world. And we though publish stories from wherever. We'll publish dispatches from Hong Kong. We'll publish dispatches from, protests, for example, in the past few weeks around the country. So I think that gives us a audience that's more local, that might be looking for articles about their home state, things like that. But whatever we do publish, even if it's local, we really do aim for our stories to have national resonance. So, you'd read a story, even if it's about a state and Politico, and you'd be looking for a kind of trend nationally or some sort of national lesson from it.
Understood. So I guess like from the Gen Z perspective, a lot of us might be a little scared off by the hard political journalism. So I guess like one of our concerns is just like trying to find an accessible way to consume political news. So would you say that the magazine is more, I guess, like accessible for those who might not like be that, like have that much experience with politics before?
Well, I think yes, I think there's this misconception that kind of politics like isn't fun, it's not sexy, it's not interesting. I think a lot of what Politico does across the board, you'd find is pretty interesting and pretty fun. It's not all like on Tuesday, so-and-so GOP congressman, da, 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 da. It's like not all that kind of straight. These are fun stories with narratives in them, with fun characters in them. So that, I think there are Politico stories that definitely do that, whether they're on Politico.com or the magazine. But I think the magazine really tries to amplify that. We try to do a lot of character-driven stories, about like interesting people around the country who have roles in politics. We try to do, a lot of narrative-driven stories and like storytelling. Storytelling can go with any subject, and I think that can make politics very very compelling if you've got real people, real scenes, real stories behind the kind of hard news that you're talking about.
Yeah, that's really
So
cool.
I would say like the answer is yes. Like we do try to kind of make politics exciting and grabby.
Mm-hmm. So I guess like, do you think that I guess like people are having this misconception of politics as not having this narrative or this like personal like, or like it seems more like policy and like hard facts rather than actually having a narrative and like actual people behind it? Do you think that's something that is like prevalent among like the general population?
That's interesting. I think that there are a couple kind of misconceptions about politics. One is that it's something that is kind of this like complex machine that's working in very complicated ways, when really it's just a bunch of normal people, trying to get power, trying to keep their jobs, trying to raise money. This isn't some sort of like heightened group of super smart individuals who see the world in some sort of way that no one else does. This is like your neighbor ran for Congress and got power, now wants to stay in power. So I think that seeing it that way can make it a little bit more accessible. Yeah, I think that, Politico's always been about trying to do the stories about people within DC. So who's up, who's down in the Oval Office, who are the people surrounding the president? Like, who are the people that, we're coming off today of this big news day where Donald Trump's been diagnosed with COVID-19. Who are the people in his inner circle who let that happen? Who are the people who oversee the security protocols, that got missed? So I think that kind of people-driven journalism maybe helps that perception a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does. And I guess like especially in the context of the upcoming election, where do you see this kind of people-driven political journalism coming into play?
How is it coming into play?
Yeah, or like is there like is there like a new perspective because of the upcoming election?
Yeah, I would say Probably you talk to people in newsrooms around the country and they'll all say that the 2016 election kind of shocked them a little bit. I think we've really made a conscious effort to focus on those areas that were a little bit undercovered last time, looking for and really going to those voters that are really going to make the decision and asking them what they think. There's a lot of high level conversation and punditry about suburban women, about independent voters, about Obama Trump voters, about blue collar workers, but that doesn't really have a lot behind it. And you can look at poll numbers and that's very helpful, but you also want to be able to talk to actual people to see the kind of sentiments behind all of this. A lot of it is surprising. For example, we published a story this morning by it was a story based in, I think it was Kentucky, and a reporter started to discover in her at home during the pandemic, basically when she was there, that a lot of Trump supporters, conservative Trump supporters, were changing their mind about Trump. And she started to dig deeper and realize that there was a whole slew of conservatives in the state who basically said, we like Trump's policies, we like Trump's judges, we like many things about Donald Trump, but we don't like him. And we're really tired of his personality, and we're tired of the way he talks about, his opponents. And we're tired of the kind of norm breaking and whatever. And that's a really interesting, specific group that may kind of fly under the radar a little bit. So yeah, I mean, we do try to do stories that really talk to real people,
Mm-hmm.
And you could think of us as a little bit as sort of, if our audience is very much DC based, you could think of us as a little bit as like translating the rest of the country for Washington and for power, explaining what's going on for the people who really read us in DC. We do have a large audience nationally, but that's a big core part of our audience. I should say the article that I was referring to was in Nebraska. It was not in Kentucky, but.
All right, very cool. And I guess you mentioned that you're working, you host the backstory, which is more of the storytelling. So could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I love history. I edit a lot of our history stories on the magazine. And I think, one of the things that the magazine does really well, and we started doing it in 2013, is cover history. And there actually weren't a lot of magazines really covering history in a way that could have lessons for today. There were stories that were kind of fun and interesting, the random guy that did this that you've never heard of, woo, but there weren't a lot of stories that were saying, okay, and this is what happened last time, and this is what that means now. And the magazine did that. Since then, you've had a lot of other we call ours the history department. Since then, you've seen a lot of other history departments crop up. The Washington Post has one. But that's been kind of a core part of Politico magazine since we launched. So I think I translated that, which is kind of the story behind the news a little bit, like the hidden story behind the news and what that tells us about today. And I brought that into the video story and that the backstory, the video series, which is really the goal of it. It's like, okay, so this thing happened. We're not just going to cover what happened. We're not going to interview necessarily people about what happened. We're going to go one step deeper and say, okay, well, when did this happen last time? What's behind it? What's been the trajectory of this kind of movement in politics? Like we did a video recently about beauty in politics and how female politicians have become a lot more comfortable talking about beauty on the trail, accepting that, they can talk about their skincare routines as well as healthcare. And so we looked at kind of the trajectory and why that's changed. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's pretty cool. So I guess you get to see how certain aspects have changed with time, right? And I guess on a different note, even though there's change throughout history, there's also that saying that history repeats itself, right? So do you also see this? Like, do you ever just like for a story or just like in your own time, you look at history and then you're like, oh no, like this is exactly what we're going through right now?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think that that's why we do the history department. You know, like the best guess we have about how things go in this country um, is how things happened before. You know, obviously, you know, the trite saying is like history doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes, which is, you know, obviously true. It's like never going to be exactly the same. And with a president like Trump, who breaks a lot of historical norms, who's kind of unlike a lot of presidents we had before, you know, it's maybe a little bit harder to predict. But, you know, I think people kept talking about Trump as this completely surprising figure that's never happened before. But through the history department, we were able to say, you know, actually, like, there was a political outsider that came in, you know, in the 19th century, and he ended up destroying his party. And here's how it happened. And here's how the party kind of capitulated to this new figure. And here's how it played out. And obviously, the parallels are incredibly stunning. You know, you could take portions of that piece and, you know, put Republican Party in there instead, and it would be very similar to what's happening today. And then you could say, okay, well, is the party in danger of going down the same road, you know? So yeah, I think that kind of, I love doing that kind of story. I think the key is when we're assigning these pieces, we need to have a lesson like that. We need to have a takeaway that is like that. You know, we try not to do, while some stories that we do are just so crazy, they're fun, they're worth doing. We really do try to have some sort of relevance. I call it the 3 R's. I don't know where I learned it, but it's like relevance, riveting, and revelatory. So it needs to be relevant, riveting, and revelatory. And like 2 of the 3 are pretty good. You know, if it's like the first time something happened, you know, you're revealing these documents for the first time and it's just an amazing story, but it's not that relevant to today's news, that's fine. You know, we'll probably publish it. But so I kind of look at it that way.
Got it. So do you think it's valuable for the average citizen to learn about political history to better inform their view on today's politics?
Yes, 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 yes. I was a history major in college. My mom was a history teacher, so that's like always been a part of my life. But I think that history is so important for so many reasons. It doesn't just show you times that what we're going through has happened before, but it gives you this kind of sense of like the long arc of things. You know, you're able to put moments in context. You're able to not to realize like little hints in what's happening today that could lead down certain paths or certain roads. It can make you, you know, it can give you a sense of your own power, I think, when you realize how many shifts the country has gone through politically and how much that, you know, certain leaders probably thought would never, ever, ever come to pass has. And you realize, well, that's because I wanted it. You know, that's because the normal voter said no, or like, I want this. And I think it gives you a sense of the country as something that's in your hands rather than this like immovable force, you know, what we were talking about earlier, like this immovable force run by these like very kind of like people like up in the stratosphere, you know. I mean, they're controlled by us.
Mm-hmm. But I guess, like, do you ever get cynical if you like think about it, like if all of this is just like if we're just perpetually stuck in this pattern of like repeating events, like do we really have a say in anything?
Well, I mean, I don't think that we're stuck in a pattern of repeating events. I mean, I do think that history provides lessons and kind of parallels, but I don't think, I mean, I think truly like, you know, what we're living through today, we've never lived through before. And the whole circumstances surrounding the Trump presidency and all the kind of, you know, maybe you're thinking like, do you have a specific example of what you think is kind of repeating itself right now?
Yeah, so I was actually talking to my history teacher about this, and she said that usually there's like a period of like a progressive period, and then there's a period of backlash. So she was like, now we're in a period of backlash, and we may get like 4 more years of backlash if depending on the election.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you talk to a lot of people and they get frustrated because they're like, wait, Roe v. Wade, I thought we were done, and now it's become a big issue again. We're having, you know, racial unrest on a scale that we last saw in the 1960s. And it seems like, and police violence, and, you look back in the 60s and the Kerner Commission under LBJ, which was investigating the unrest in cities, got together and they said, what's behind it? And they said, okay, wait, actually police brutality is behind this. We need to fix that. And like nothing happened. And here we are decades later doing the same thing. So I totally get that. And yeah, of course, that makes me frustrated. It makes probably a lot of people frustrated. But when I talk to people who lived through that previous era, which I did, for a video, they were more optimistic. They pointed to all the kinds of things that have changed. They said, look out at the crowds of people protesting, and it's way more diverse than it was in the past. You have all kinds of colors, all kinds of ages, all kinds of nationalities out there protesting, racism. And in the past, it was not like that. It was very much kind of a black and white issue. So then you have things like social media, which has dramatically changed how you can organize. I mean, it's come with some negative things too. But yeah, I mean, I do think, you're right. It's interesting. I think if I got that upset about politics, I just couldn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
I just couldn't do it. And I've had, I've known people who, I had a friend who went into the environmental movement and was like, I just couldn't do it because I was just too upset all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But you really do have to kind of keep your eye on the ball. And for people in the press, it's like, you try not to see yourself as an advocate for a certain kind of outcome. But you are trying to kind of chronicle what's going on as best you can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, understood. And I guess pulling this back to, like the Gen Z audience. And so when we're learning about history in school, so right now I'm actually taking US history.
Okay.
So like, what should we keep in mind as we learn about the history of our country and how it applies to today's American politics?
What should you keep in mind?
Yep.
No, what were you going to say?
So like, are there any, I guess, like, I don't know, like perspectives or like any, I guess, like ways of thinking that we should embrace when we're learning about stuff?
I think, I mean, I said it before, I'll say it again. You have more power than you think. Power to run for office, especially like, I think we look at the people who are in power and we think, like that's something that, 60-year-old men do after they've been a partner at a law firm or whatever. Like those rules just are going out the door. So I think that there's more room for newer, younger voices. That's one thing. Generationally, like make, change, you're going to be a huge voting generation, and that change is kind of possible for you to make, to have in your hands. What else? I was going to say something else. I sometimes think about this a little bit. The United States is a very new country. I think when we start thinking about when we study history, you start with the founders and it seems so far away. And there were a bunch of like guys in wigs and, and heels and, in Philadelphia. So much has changed since then. But the United States is really relatively very young. And it's an amazing experiment that's lasted. So, you can have this kind of appreciation for the democracy, like the fact that we have a peaceful transfer of power every year is pretty remarkable. So I think like finding the kind of learning history and finding the good things about the country that really like things that are sort of worth fighting for and worth appreciating, you know, building a new kind of, patriotism that like, about the kind of good things in America. I think that's something that the country could use, honestly, at a time of such great division. So thinking about that as you study history. And also, I think thinking about the country's history as kind of a newcomer. If you think about it, like the United States has only been the global world power since World War II. That's really not that long ago. And that thinking of it that way, I think helps me understand a lot of the kind of like mistakes that the country's made, a lot of the paths that the country's gone down. Yeah. Also, if anyone in your generation can somehow like fix the horrible, horrible partisanship and divide we have, like that'd be great.
Yes, definitely. All right. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for joining me here today. I'll let you go back to your busy news day. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll see everybody next time on Inside Politics. Hi, everyone. This is Christina. Thank you so much for watching Inside Politics, and please feel free to check out the rest of the interviews on my channel. See you next time.